Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello and welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness to all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. My name is Debbie, I'm your host today, with Josh from the office. Hello, Josh.
Hello.
How you going?
Yeah, good.
We've had some fun reading today, haven't we?
Absolutely. Plenty of numbers.
Yeah, lots of numbers. Yeah, the last thing on Friday, the latest quarterly report from the NDIA came out on the progress of the NDIS. This comes out every quarter, obviously. So this is quarter 3 of the 2022-23. And it basically breaks down everything that's been going on in the NDIS, all the stats, all the information that they've collated, lots of figures of outcomes, experience, all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So having had a look through the report, Josh, I thought we'd record an episode of because there's some really useful information in it. So did you want to start with some of the overview of the information in the report?
Yeah, so it just sort of breaks down sort of an overlook of what's happening in the NDIS community. So the first point you've got here is that participation in community and social activities has increased by 7 percentage points from 35% to 42% for all scheme participants aged 15 years and older.
That's pretty good. So obviously this is not adults, but not the younger children that do make up a large percentage, and I think that's probably written in one of the figures. But I guess people that are considered adults or sub-adults and likely to maybe be in the NDIS for a lot of their life, if not all of their life. Yeah, so what other?
Yeah, so second point here is participation in work. Percentage in a paid job has increased by 12 percentage points from 9% to 21% for participants aged 15 to 24 with autism.
And a similar increase from 11 to 20% for those aged 15 to 24 with an intellectual disability.
Yeah, I think that's a really big stat to look at because I think, as the report goes on to say, is that a large percentage of the NDIS participants do have autism. So I think that's probably why it's at the front of the report.
Yeah. I also like the stat that the percentage of parents and carers in a paid job has increased by 6 points from 46 to 51 for parents and carers of participants aged 0 to 14 years. So that's really telling us that I guess they're getting more support to look after their children so that they can actually go out and earn a living.
Yeah.
For not have to rely on the NDIS financially so much.
Yeah, there's definitely more money going towards support, which is what I think the biggest thing that we need in the NDIS is more money towards supporting people.
Yeah, and we also need the carers to be able to get their lives back.
Yeah.
Especially the carers and the parents of younger participants.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And then the other overall point here in the introduction is that just positive perceptions of whether the NDIS has helped with choice and control has increased 10 points from 67% to 77%. So from participants aged 15 years and older. So that's a pretty good figure. 77% are saying that it's positive in their life, giving them choice and control, which is what it's all meant to be about.
Yeah, I think that sort of is probably the point from that main first page that is most relatable to us, giving participants choice and control, with things like where they live. So yeah.
Yeah. So what else did you find in that report?
Just going through the report here. Actually, I found it interesting reading about the different people that they spoke to just when they were coming up with, sort of reviewing the NDIS, they sort of spoke to a whole range of people. And as the report goes on to say, they're the people who know their disability and what they need the most. So I found that really interesting.
They're the experts.
Yes, the word. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's also good that, and this is something we've known about for a while, is to the people in the NDIA board, that the NDI board now has 6 out of the 12 board members with disability, which is the highest in its history. And I think that is so important that people now making these decisions are doing it from a lived experience perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, obviously there was a lot of information, a lot of details, but there's also just data figures. And looking here at this section, data highlights. So what is that telling us, Josh?
So as of the 31st of March 2023, there were 592,059 participants who are receiving NDIS support.
And that's an increase of 21,179 participants this quarter since the 31st of December. And of those new participants who joined, almost 50%, just under 10,000, were children under the age of 7. So that brings us to 95,000 participants under the age of 7 in the scheme.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think in the space that we work in, you got to think about the homes that have to be built for not just the people now, but also the people who are under 7, who are 15, who will need a home, in 5-10 years' time.
That's right, yeah, because they might be living with their parents, but once they get to the point where they have the right to live independently, where they wish to live independently, they wish to maybe hold down a job, do whatever it is, participation in the community, they have every right to live in their own home. And so those number of participants that are currently younger children or teenage children are going to eventually need SDA. So, we keep saying that the numbers of SDA participants are still really low. There's going to be a lot more come on, and this just shows you the potential there. Obviously, a lot of those children that are coming in have got things like autism, intellectual disabilities, but a lot of those disabilities actually do require SDA as adults.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also goes into the point earlier of getting parents back to work and that sort of thing. You can't expect the parent to have to house their child for the rest of their life. In a lot of cases, they mightn't be able to. So they'll definitely need homes as well, and they should definitely have funding for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Another point that was mentioned in this report that I found interesting was the AAT cases. That's the Administrative Appeals Tribunal cases, and this has been talked about a lot in previous quarters. There were 963 new cases this quarter, and whilst that seems a lot, that is actually a 66% decrease from the peak of 1.51% of cases from December 31st, 2021. So that's dropped a lot in that period of time. Now, a lot of the AAT cases are relevant to SDA. We know that there have been many participants who've been knocked back or given a lower level of funding than they believe they need when they've applied for SDA, and they've gone back to the agency to have that decision reviewed. They've still got a negative review, so they've then had to take it to the AAT. And we also know that a vast majority of appeals that do make it to the AAT do actually come out in favour of the participants. That's something like 97, 98% of those cases. But it's just really good to see that the cases going as far as the AAT are dropping a lot, because that just says that the NDIA are starting to look more closely at cases coming to them and plans being proposed to them and giving a more fair judgment first off.
Yeah, they probably have a lot more understanding now, which is great, of what different people with different disabilities need. And it's probably, as you said, looking more closely at every case instead of trying to put a blanket over everything. So yeah, I think that's really good to see.
Yeah. And there were some overall numbers that were reiterated that actually go back to the June 2022 annual financial sustainability report we discussed before, that there will be a projection of 741,000 participants in the scheme at the end of June 2026 and 1,017,000 at the end of June 32. So they're still noting that. I guess because they believe that those figures are on target. So, yeah, we've got a long way to go. Now, I guess that then goes into the whole fraud and overspending that has been subject of a lot of discussion around the NDIS in recent months. And it says here the NDIA continues its targeted fraud and compliance activity. This includes proactively monitoring and responding to incorrect or unusual claims made by registered providers. This quarter, there was an increase in the number of tip-offs received. The NDIA actually received 4,633 tip-offs this quarter, as compared to 2,185 for the same period in 2021-2022. So that's more than double. So I think the awareness is there. There are currently 14 matters before the courts under prosecution, which are a total alleged fraud value of $12.9 million.
Wow.
Yeah. So we know that that's sort of the overview of everything. But when it comes to figures being spent in the NDIS, I haven't taken note here of the supports that are being paid out for supported independent living. We know that's probably the largest amount of monies going out of the NDIS to participants' plans. But it's a very major chunk. It's in the many billions of dollars. Now, people often say to us, we talk to a lot of potential investors about the sustainability of specialist disability accommodation, don't they, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the first questions that you hear on the phone is it going to last? Is it going to last? What can I do with my house? And if it's not still going in 10 years' time, and I think that's not always the right way to think.
Yeah, is the government going to pull it? What's going to happen? Well, just to put this in perspective, the percentage supports that are committed to SDA is less than 1% of the NDIS budget, $353 million. So we're talking about a real small amount of money here in the greater scheme of things. So I think that's just really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it's obviously in the news a fair bit, the NDIS spending, but as you can see with that number there, it's certainly not. The money is not going down the drain here at all. I mean, it's obviously going towards a very good cause, and it's not a huge percentage.
Yep. Now, I've actually gone into one of the appendices from the quarterly report, which is all about SDA stats. As everyone knows, I love my data.
Absolutely.
The numbers. And I've just pulled out a few figures here, and these are updates that we will be publishing in our next quarterly SDA supply and demand report that we do.
Fun times ahead.
Yep. We do every time this report comes out. But just very briefly, we've got 7,720 enrolled SDA dwellings in Australia at the moment, and 32% of those high physical support, 13% fully accessible, 27% basic. Again, that's the basic that will end up being defunded over time. The number of enrolled SDA dwellings by the maximum number of residents, this is interesting, and this is telling us that 31% of places in those 7,720 homes are in group homes or homes of 4, 5 or 6 plus residents. So 37% in one resident dwellings. So we can look at that as being units and villas with one resident.
Yeah, you'd think so, yeah.
Getting quite a lot of the enrolments, and a large percentage there is in the older style disability homes. Now, new build homes, what is happening? That's all enrolled, new and old. The new build homes, of which there are 6,480 enrolled new build dwellings, 56% of those are in high physical support.
Yeah, wow.
So, and only 11% in robust, 13% fully accessible, 19% improved livability. So we often tell people, though, that building to high physical support isn't all bad.
No, because I guess it can help people through a lot of levels of funding. It can help people with fully accessible funding, with improved livability funding as well. So that actually does, account for a large portion of SDA population.
For about 90% of people can still live in a high physical support. But the issue is the funding level.
Yeah.
Yeah, because investors build a high physical support home. They want to get high physical support funded tenants in there for that high income. And if you have an improved livability tenant in, it will be lower. But something else we've also mentioned, but for those who haven't listened to all those old episodes, the people that are getting funded for SDA, remember these people have, on the whole, degenerative diseases. So even if they've got improved livability funding, there is a significant chance that they will actually need to move into a fully accessible or a high physical support home some stage later in their life as their physical situation deteriorates. So,
yeah, I might imagine there are people out there currently who have that IL funding who know that perhaps their condition could fall over time, and they are seeking high physical support for a very specific reason.
Yeah, absolutely. So this takes us into a whole nother conversation, which we won't go into here. We have touched on it in previous episodes, but I just thought that was really interesting that 56% of all new builds are high physical support currently. The other thing I saw was the number of pipeline dwellings that the NDIA have reported on. And again, very high with the high physical support, 67% of dwellings in the pipeline are high physical support. The last two stats that I looked at here for SDA was the actual number of participants with SDA funding. And what we've got here is a total number of 24,000. Now, this has gone up probably 700 since the last quarter. I think it was 23,000 something.
Yeah.
Then what we're looking at is 5,707 of those participants are currently seeking a home. So that's Australian-wide, obviously, but that is a large number of participants, majority of whom are currently living in an SDA dwelling. That number I'm seeing going up every quarter. More people who are currently in an SDA dwelling are seeking to move. And Josh, I guess that's for a couple of reasons.
Yeah, well, I guess the new builds that are happening, that are being built, currently or just finishing, a couple of months ago, they're probably more purpose-built for people. So they're probably wanting to move into a new build. But also, I'd say maybe group homes. Getting people out of group homes is probably the biggest reason. Getting people, once they get their funding, they're going out and they're looking to go and live on their own or live with, another person rather than 5 other people.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, the vast majority of people that are on this, in that 24,000 are still, a lot of them are still living in older homes. And I guess that a part of that is that some of them might not even realise that they can move into a new SDA, or they are at this point in time happy with where they are, but the property that they're living in will actually be defunded down the track. So it doesn't look like there's a huge percentage at the moment. In fact, there's 24% of SDA funded participants currently looking for a dwelling. But that number, we're seeing that go up every quarter.
Yeah,
that's
definitely.
Continue to happen. So that kind of brings us to the end of the overview of these stats. Any takeaways from all of this, Josh?
I think mostly what I've seen is pretty positive. Certainly in the NDIS stats that they released. It'll take a little while to go through all the SDA numbers, but, it clearly shows that there's still that 5,000 people still needing an SDA home. That obviously means that we need more SDA places.
Absolutely, yeah. And with the number of participants joining every quarter, we know the demand is going to go up.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, no, it was interesting reading. And, if you want to delve into that quarterly report, you can just Google the NDIS quarterly report, and I'll get Erin to put a link to it in the description of this episode. So I guess that rounds up this little overview of the quarterly report for March 2023. We'll leave you with that to ponder on.
Perfect.
So thanks, Josh.
Thank you very much.
Okay, see you on the next one.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.